Hey, sixth graders, we are on to lesson 19-1, 19-2, which is all about solving rate and unit rate problems. Now, we have already defined rate and unit rate in our previous lesson, but just to start out with a little review here, rate and unit rate, they don't change our units like we did with our last lesson where we were changing from one measurement to another. This time we're not changing the units at all. We're just showing how the ratio would change, how it would get bigger or smaller if we needed more or less of something. So it's kind of like making equivalent ratios. Now, to explain again today, I'm going to use a story problem, and I'm going to use the same story problem for a rate example and then for a unit rate example. So, I know it's not a very long story, but our story is that a recipe calls for 6 eggs and 2 cups of sugar. So recipes are a big way to do rate and unit rate because a lot of times we make recipes bigger or smaller depending on how much we need to make. So the first example that we're going to do down here is rate. A question on rate might say, if I need to use a dozen eggs before they go bad, then how many cups of sugar do I need? So the recipe calls for 6, but we know that a dozen means 12 eggs, and we need to use all 12 of those eggs before they go bad. So then how many cups of sugar do I need? In order to do this, we are going to set up a proportion. So for this, we're going to set up 2 ratios that are next to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my 6 eggs for every 2 cups, which is what they gave us at the beginning. So I just wrote my ratio that they gave me in the story, 6 eggs for 2 cups of sugar. Now, what we're changing is our amount. So instead of 6 eggs, we're going to do 12 eggs. Now, notice over here I made a little note, and I said, unlike conversions, the labels must be on the same side. So my eggs were on the top in the first one, so my eggs still need to be on top. And it doesn't matter if they're on top or bottom, as long as they're both on the top or both on the bottom. So now I put 12 eggs, and I don't know how many cups I'm going to need right here, so that's why I put X. Now, to do this problem, there are 2 ways that you can solve, and I will probably in class make you try all of the ways, so don't just say, oh, this way is my favorite, I'm going to stick with this way, because we're going to practice all of them. So the 2 ways to solve, our first way here is cross multiply, cross multiply and divide. So you'll see, I just kind of abbreviated over here, and I set up the same thing I wrote up above, 6 eggs over 2 cups of sugar, and then 12 eggs over X. Now to cross multiply and divide, it's kind of like our butterfly. We are going to circle like an X, because it says cross multiply. So I circle my 6 with my X and my 12 with my 2. Now we're going to multiply those, and we're going to make them on 2 separate sides of the equal sign. So when I rewrite this, I rewrite it over here as 6 times X, which is 6X, equals 12 times 2, which is 24. Now this looks like an equation that we know how to solve, because we know to solve an equation we have to get X by itself and we have to do the opposite of what we see. So I see right here a multiplication problem, right? So I'm going to have to divide. So we're going to divide by 6 on this side and divide by 6 on this side. Now when I rewrite that, I'm just left with, let me scooch it down a little bit. I'm left with X equals, what's 24 divided by 6? 4. So I got X equals 4. So in place here, how many would we need? Well, we would need 4 cups of sugar. Now that's way number 1, cross multiply and divide. The second way is that we look at it kind of like our proportions. When we were filling in those tables and there was the missing piece in the table, we would ask ourselves, how do we get from this number to this number? So we would have to do the same to the top and the bottom. So you'll notice, again, I started with the same thing. I have my 2 ratios here, my 6 eggs over my 2 cups of sugar, 12 over, I have no idea what I need. So I'm going to draw a little arrow, and I'm going to say, how in the world did I get from 6 to 12? Well, first, am I getting bigger or smaller? I'm getting bigger. So you ask yourself, am I multiplying or dividing, not just adding? So we took 6 and we did times 2 to get to 12. So if I did times 2 on the top, our rule is we have to do the same thing to the top and the bottom. So if I did times 2 on the top, I need to do times 2 down here. 2 times 2 gets me 4. So you can either cross multiply and divide, or you can figure out what they did on the top or the bottom, and you do the same to the other side where the piece is missing. So either of those ways would solve. Now, that is an example of rate because they're getting bigger or smaller. But remember, we did unit rate back with our groceries. So I'm going to go switch to my next page. You might be able to fit this on the same page. We're going to do unit rate now. Okay, unit rate. We did this back when we did the grocery store in our classroom and we were trying to find the cheapest item. Remember that unit rate means that they're asking for only one of something. So this is kind of like rate where we're getting bigger or smaller, but it's always going down to 1 instead of just any number. So now our example here is using the same recipe. How many eggs would I need if I only have 1 cup of sugar? So again, down here, I wrote the same starting rate here. We have 6 eggs over 2 cups because that's what our recipe called for. But on the other side of this equal sign, I know that I only have 1 cup. Notice again, I made sure that my cups are on the same side because we have to line them up for a proportion. So now you have your choice again. You can 1, cross multiply and divide. You can figure out what you did to the top or the bottom and do the same thing on the other side. Or number 3 is, remember when we did this in class with the grocery store, all you have to do for unit rate is just divide. So either of those ways would work, and I'm going to show you all 3 down below here. So number 1 is cross multiply and divide. So for number 1, you would do 6 times 1, which gets me 6, equals 2 times x, which gets me 2x. Now I see 2 times x, so I'm going to divide by 2, so we get 3 equals x. That's way number 1. That's the cross multiply and divide. Number 2, we can figure out what we did to the top and bottom. Actually, I'm going to do this in, what haven't I used? I haven't used green. Number 2, so I know that to go from 2 to 1, we went smaller, so we divided by 2. So if I divided by 2 on the bottom, I need to divide by 2 on, oops, I did times. I need to divide by 2 on the top. So 6 divided by 2 equals 3. So this way we also figure out that 6 divided by 2 equals 3. And then our third way is like we did in the classroom when we had the grocery store example, was we just divided. And what we're just dividing is that original ratio that we set up. So number 3 here, we're going to look just at the 6 eggs for every 2 cups of sugar. If I want to know 1 cup of sugar, I'm just going to divide this. So I set it up like a division problem. Cowboy and the horse, remember that one? So 2 goes into 6 3 times, and that's my final answer. So notice all 3 of these ways that I did it, I got 3 every time. Any of those work, and we're going to practice all 3 ways, but the important thing is you just understand that when we're setting these up, the left side and the right side are going to end up being equivalent ratios. Thank you for watching your video. We will see you guys soon. Adios.